In this video, we will talk about the structure and the function of the brain. One thing to remember is that you're not doing a neuroanatomy course here. We're just learning a little bit about some of the structures. So don't think that you have to learn all the parts of the brain. Save that for university if that's the type of course that you're going on to. In our previous video, when we were looking at the organisation of the nervous system, we said that the brain is part of the central nervous system and is protected by bone. So it's protected by the skull. And the brain that we've got here, this is the front of the brain. This is where your forehead is. This is the back of the brain. And this is the part of the brain that goes down to the spinal cord, continuous with the spinal cord. The brain itself consists of approximately 86 billion neurons, which is kind of an amazing thought. So amazing that I forgot how to spell the word billion. So 86 billion neurons. Hard to imagine number. All reactions in the body will pass through the brain and will be coordinated brain, apart from reflex actions, which we'll talk about more when we talk about neurons and neuron structure. The brain's protected by the brain, also protected by three membranes, very tough membranes, called the meninges. And if you've heard of meningitis, this is where people get an infection of the meninges, one of these membranes or all these membranes, and when they swell, that puts pressure on the brain. You've got the different names of them here. Really fascinating names. If you're interested in neuroanatomy, look at where the names of these come from. Dura mater, for example, stands for tough mother. It's a really tough membrane. But definitely beyond the scope of this video. Just very, very interesting. Between these membranes, you also have cerebrospinal fluid, which is a fluid that helps to cushion against shock, because you don't want the skull and the brain connecting with each other and banging against each other if you move your head. So you've got this liquid layer to kind of cushion that in the brain. The parts of the brain that we're going to worry about today, we've got the cerebrum, which is involved in voluntary actions such as speech, learning, thought, touch, taste, things like that. The cerebellum looks like a cauliflower at the back of the brain. This is unconscious functions, non-voluntary movement, posture, balance, things like that, all coordinated by the cerebellum. The medulla oblongata we've met before, and we've been talking about blood pressure and heart rate. Part of the brainstem, and the medulla oblongata is autonomic control. So it's the heart rate, the blood pressure, breathing rate are all controlled by the medulla oblongata. Hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, right in the middle of the brain. Hypothalamus controls your temperature, thermoregulation, the blood pressure, osmoregulation, and the pituitary gland will store and release hormones into the blood in response to what the hypothalamus tells it to do. So these are the main brain structures that we are going to look at today in a little bit of detail. So we're going to start talking about the cerebrum. So this is the largest area of the brain and has a very large surface area, lots of kind of convolutions and foldings. Have a Google of a rat brain cerebrum compared to a human brain. We have got much more foldings in our cerebrum to take account of all the higher functions that we are capable of compared to a rat, for example. So we've got two sides to this cerebrum. We call them two hemispheres. With the hemispheres, what we find is that the left hemisphere actually processes the information from the right side. So it takes in sensory input from the right side of the body, and has motor control of the right side of the body. And the right hemisphere takes in sensory input from the left side of the body and controls the left side of the body. So you've got that swapping over of information. We'll look at some of the different parts of the cerebrum on the next slide, but there is some evidence that like the right side is more in control of face recognition, spatial awareness, where you are in the world, and the left hemisphere is in control of things like speech and analysis, mathematical skills, things like that. So watch out for that at university if you do a lot of neuroanatomy. Really fascinating area of study. The cerebrum as well, in addition to the left and right side, the left and right hemispheres is separated into different lobes, which are known to have different functions. Frontal lobe, so this is the front of your brain, so this is your forehead, and this is the back of your head. Frontal lobe has things like motor control, so kind of problem solving, speech. They're controlled by the frontal lobe. Temporal lobe in green here is your hearing, your language skills, memory are in your temporal lobe. Parietal lobe in yellow is touch, kind of navigation, knowing where your body is. So kind of like spatial awareness of where your body is. Parietal lobe has something called the somatosensory cortex. And it's kind of like a map, and what you can do is you can map on this parietal lobe along the somatosensory cortex. You can map where the neurons are, the sensory neurons in different parts of your body. I'm going to show you that on the next slide, the type of information you can build up with this. But neuroanatomists can have like this pinpoint accuracy for what different parts of the cerebrum do in your body. Really fascinating. The occipital lobe is involved in sight and visual processing. So when you've got an image, and if you're trying to identify what the image is, visual processing. So that's in the occipital lobe of the cerebrum. Now this very funny person, this is called a sensory homunculus. Homunculus means little man. And this is related to that somatosensory cortex I talked about. So this is along the parietal lobe, and it's showing you, as you look down the parietal lobe, how much space is taken up to different parts of the body. So the somatosensory cortex, larger parts of the cerebrum in this area are taken up by things like the hands, the mouth, the tongue, sensitive places that have lots of sensory neuron endings that need to get lots of input so that you can identify things by touch or taste or with your lips. Other parts of your body which are less important for this, for example your shoulder, they are have less of the somatosensory cortex area responsible for their neurons. And this image here is trying to show you that if the size of the somatosensory cortex was proportional to the size of the body part, then we would all look like this man, or I'd look like the female version of this man. There's a scary thought, isn't it? So yeah, look out for this, this sensory homunculus. It's just a nice way of kind of showing some scientific information. The next part we're going to look at is the cerebellum, which I always think when you do a brain dissection looks a little bit like some cauliflower stuck to the back of the brain. Don't write that in any assessments or say that at university. But the cerebellum is involved in balance, coordination, posture, your body position, and it coordinates unconscious functions. So for example, when you walk across the room, you have got to bring in lots of different information. So you need to know what type of room you're in, you need to see any obstacles, what surface you're walking on, is it even, is it uneven, are you walking upstairs? And you need to hold your body in the correct position so that your legs move properly and you don't fall over, and all that information is coordinated by the cerebellum. The medulla oblongata is part of the brainstem. So in the brainstem, you have the medulla oblongata. You also have, so you have the medulla oblongata, you have the pons, and you have the midbrain. And it's kind of this region here. Medulla oblongata is part of that. And we've met this before. It is taking control of the basic functions of life that we don't have to think about. Heart rate, breathing, coughing, swallowing, all things you don't have to think about consciously, because the brainstem takes control of that. Eye movement, there's another one. I'll keep thinking of more. And it connects to the spinal cord. So basically the medulla oblongata, if it ties in with our previous video, is kind of the regulatory center for the autonomic nervous system. But we did meet some actions of the medulla oblongata previously. The last parts to worry about at this level are the hypothalamus. Oh, that is a terrible colour to choose, isn't it? Are the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So we will start with the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is the main control region for the autonomic system. So the medulla oblongata is important too, but the hypothalamus is the main control region. So it's going to be controlling the parasympathetic and the sympathetic pathways that we talked about in the previous video. It's going to control behavior such as sleep, feeding, eating. It will monitor your blood glucose levels. It monitors your water levels in your blood. Remember how its role in osmoregulation. You've got those osmoreceptor cells in there as well. It's also an endocrine gland. So this means it produces hormones. So it produces hormones as well. Pituitary gland, this was always my favourite part at university to identify in my practical neuroanatomy classes, because if you've got a section of a brain dissection in front of you, it looks like a tiny little pea. Kind of looks, this is a very bad picture, but it kind of looks like this. And it's, yeah, it looks like a pea that you might eat for your dinner. Very small, massively important, and controls most of the glands in your body. Has two sections. We've got the anterior pituitary gland, and that produces 6 different hormones. Hormones such as growth hormone, and hormones such as follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, that's involved in reproduction, which you'll talk about these hormones more at university, but they're produced in the anterior part of this pituitary gland. Posterior part of the pituitary gland stores and releases hormones too, but stores them, so it doesn't produce them. Hormones that have been made by the hypothalamus. We've seen this before when we talked about the ADH, that hormone that's involved in osmoregulation. It's produced by the hypothalamus, and then released by the posterior pituitary gland at the appropriate time. So these are absolutely essential parts of the brain. Lots of other parts of the brain. At this level, please don't worry about them. Look out for them at university though, they're fun. The rest of this video is just about how do we actually know this about the brain. Okay, so I've told you all these different structures and what they do and where they are, but how do we know this? I can't go into a lot of detail about it. It's beyond the scope of the course, but I'll mention some things that you can go and search for if you're really interested in it. One good way to study the brain is dissection. If you get the chance to do brain dissection, it's good, it's fun. I've never dissected a human brain before anyone asks me, but yeah, dissection is really interesting. Humans, animals have many of the same structures, but like the cerebrum is nowhere near as folded as the animal as we are, the human version. You can do this as an autopsy in humans or even animals. So if you've got someone who's died of something and you don't know what it is, you can do an autopsy on their brain to see if you can work out what it is. There's lots of different imaging techniques you can use. So you've got things like PET scans. You have got MRI scans and functional MRI scans. Again, it's beyond the scope to tell you lots about it, but go and Google it if you're interested in it, or use other search engines. This picture here, the really cool video, this is taken by functional MRI. It uses very powerful magnets to change the orientation of all the hydrogen in your brain. It's really cool. But this is looking at from the top of the brain, top of the skull to the bottom of the skull, kind of passing through the vein. This is not an MRI, I lied to you. This is CT scan. So this is the functional MRI as part of the MRI as well. So yeah, really interesting ways to look at the brain. But one of the really interesting things you do with brains, or you can do with brains, are called lesion studies. And what you do is you look in a brain that has been damaged in some way and compare it to a brain that's not been damaged. And you can do this by dissection. So you could dissect a normal brain with a lesion brain. You can do it by scanning, so it doesn't have to be in a dead patient. You can compare the brain of an MRI scan from a stroke victim with a person who has not had a stroke. In the old days, back in the day, they would do this in different ways. So you could do it in animals, so you could just remove part of the brain or damage part of the brain and see the effect on animals. But some work was done on humans. And this is a really interesting story. And I'm going to put a link to the story on Canvas because it's absolutely fascinating. But this is Phineas Gage. And in 1848, when he was 25 years old, he had a horrible accident. And the accident involved this pole. So this is called a tamping iron. And it's involved in... so he was building a railroad. And to build a railroad, you have to blow up mountains. So you make a hole to stick the dynamite in, you put the dynamite in, and then you use this tamping rod to poke the dynamite in nice and deep. And as he was poking the dynamite in nice and neat with his tamping iron, created a spark, the dynamite ignited and shot the tamping iron through his brain. So it went through this left side of his face. And one of the creepy things is we still have his skull and the tamping iron in museum in America. So scientists can work on this, and now they can use like modern scanning techniques to see where the pole went in and where it came out. So it went in kind of in his jaw, it came out through his forehead, completely destroying his left frontal lobe. And he didn't die, as you can see by this picture. He's alive. So he was alive, but he did have changes after this. So he's got a lesion in his brain and he had changes. So he had some major personality changes. So I think he was a fine, upstanding young man. And then after this horrible accident, he became much more impulsive. He started to swear a lot. Yeah, and a complete personality change. This didn't last forever, though. Interestingly, his personality change only lasted 2 to 3 years before he became a nice young man again. And the idea is that other parts of his brain could take over the functioning and the control, so that he had those filters on, so he would stop swearing and saying bad things that would shock the people in the 1850s. He did die young. He died about 12 years after the accident due to an epileptic fit, an epileptic seizure. So that would likely to be due to the massive damage in his brain. And there are lots of other lesion stories like this that help scientists discover which different parts of the brain do. But I don't recommend destroying part of your brain with a massive rod of iron to see what it does. Thank you.